Welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In the previous section we created this workbook using the Excel web app, and in this section I'm going to talk about how to share this workbook and how to make it available online on a web page. Before I do, I'd just like to say a couple of other things about what you can and can't do with the Excel web app and give you a couple of tips about its use. Now, I mentioned before that there are certain things that the web app can cope with, like pivot tables, but you can't actually create them from the web app. In this example, I chose to create this using the web app to show going right from scratch to a working Excel workbook available on the web. But in many ways, if you want to make something available, the best bet is to create it in your desktop version of Excel, which gives you all the full capabilities of Excel, and then to save it from the desktop to normally SkyDrive. That means that if you want something like pivot tables, you can create them in the desktop version, and then subject to some constraints you'll be able to use those perfectly well in the web app. Now, it's not only pivot tables that have this constraint. You can't create, for instance, array formulas in the web app, and you can't create some of the more advanced charts in the web app either. Whereas if you've created them on the desktop version, the web app can cope with displaying and using them. So that's an important point to bear in mind. Another point to bear in mind is that if you are creating an application to run on the web, the sort of thing that we're going to do later in this section, it's a good principle to try to hide as much of the content of that as you can, so that other people can't just steal your ideas or in fact break your application. Now, in this particular example here, I've got a loan affordability calculator. I'm going to put this onto a website, and I'm relying on people typing in here 6%, say. Well, it might be a better idea to make this available as a limited number of possible values, maybe using something like a slicer, and putting the range of available interest rates into that device, that filter, slicer, whatever, and then letting people just choose from that rather than typing an interest rate in. And if I chose to take that route, then for instance the range of available values I could hide on a hidden part of this workbook. Now, when it comes to hidden parts of workbooks, the other thing to be aware of is that the normal protection features of Excel cannot be used in the Excel web app. You can protect all or part of a workbook, you can hide it, you can make it so that people can't change it, but you can't use the normal sheet protection facilities that you use in the desktop version of Excel. And there are certain other things that don't work at all in the web app. You can't do data validation, VBA macros don't run, you can't do links to external workbooks, for example. So let's now look at sharing this workbook from SkyDrive. Now, the share button is at the right hand end of the home tab. Click on the drop down there and we have two options. We have share with people and embed. I'm going to do embed later on. Let's start with share with people. Now, what you're doing here, as the screen tip says, is you're inviting other people to view or edit this workbook. Now, when you do this, the important thing is that you are letting people either read or actually edit this workbook in situ within your SkyDrive location. So you've got to be pretty careful about who you give access to using this method. If you are allowing somebody to edit, so if you look at the checkbox down here, recipients can edit, they really will be able to go in there and edit your workbook. So be careful who you give that right to. So you put in here a list of the people that you want to be able to, in this case, edit this workbook, and then you can include a personal message if you want to, just telling them why you're letting them edit this workbook. For people for whom you only want them to be able to read the workbook in situ, just uncheck that box and then they'll only be able to read it. You can also post the book to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can also get a link that you could use elsewhere, for instance independently on a blog or on a web page or whatever. So once you've decided who you want to be able to edit, send them an edit link. People you only want to be able to read, send them a read link. Click on share. It's as simple as that. And then those people will be able to open and either edit or read your workbook. So that's one way of sharing. So now let's look at the other option, which is the embed option. Note, our loan affordability calculator takes 3 inputs and produces a loan amount as the amount that a person can borrow based on those 3 inputs. So click on share and embed. Now in order to embed loan affordability into a blog or a web page, we have a generate option here that generates the HTML code that you need to embed this file into a blog or web page. So click on generate. The code is generated. The code is down here, and I'm going to use that code in a moment, but let's just look at some of these options. We get a preview on the right of how this will look on the web page. Now if I had a little bit more time, I'd probably pretty this up and put a heading on it, maybe put some box around it and so on. But for the moment, I'm just going to keep this pretty much as it appears there. But note, you have a number of options what to show. Do you want to show people the entire workbook, or do you just want to select a range? Now if you in fact had 2 or 3 sheets in this workbook and you had some data you wanted to hide on one sheet and the part that you want people to be able to use another sheet, you could hide a whole sheet. You can of course just hide a range as well if you want to. On the appearance side, you can hide the grid lines, checked at the moment. You can hide the row and column headers, checked at the moment, and you can include a download link. Then we have some interaction options. Do you want people to be able to sort and filter? Do you want to let people type into cells? Their changes will not be saved. Well, we certainly want people to be able to type into cells so that they can put their own values in. And do you want to start with a particular cell selected? Now the cell I want people to start with is the annual interest rate cell, so that they can put in the current annual interest rate, or the one they've been offered on their loan. So that's going to be cell C2. So I'm going to say yes, I want to start in cell C2. I can choose the dimensions, and then I have my embed code here, the JavaScript embed code. Click in there, click in copy, and watch what happens here. Now what's happened here is that Internet Explorer has done what it's supposed to do, which is to warn me that a web page is trying to access my clipboard. Now generally speaking, that's potentially quite a dangerous thing. In this case of course I know that the web page that I'm dealing with is part of my use of the Excel web app to work on this workbook, so I'm absolutely happy about it. You won't normally see this kind of warning if you're working in the desktop Excel of course, but it is something you'll see from time to time when you do this kind of thing in the Excel web app. So it's just Internet Explorer doing what it's supposed to do, which is to warn you about web pages trying to access your computer. In this occasion obviously I'm completely happy about that, so I click on allow access, and the contents of that embed code is now copied to my clipboard. What I'm going to do is to create a dummy page on my website, put this embed code in it, and we'll see how it looks. And there we are. All I've done, very simply, I've just put an empty page in my website and I've pasted that code into it, and you can now see my little Excel web app loan affordability calculator in place. You can see that the cell I specified is selected, so I could stick with 6%, or maybe say, well, this person's very lucky, they can get a loan interest rate of 4%. Change the monthly payment that the person can afford. I'm going to say, well, let's make it $250 a month. Let's stick with 5 years, and then you can see as I go through that the loan amount I can borrow gets updated. So I've got a working Excel workbook on a website, and the workbook itself was created using the Excel web app. So that all works pretty well, and of course it would be very little extra effort to make this whole page look a lot prettier on my website as well. So that's it from me on the Excel web app. I suggest you try to create a couple of workbooks yourself, either on your desktop version and then save them to SkyDrive, or create them using the Excel web app itself and then try uploading them to your blog or your website, and just get used to what is an increasingly powerful option for using Excel remotely and giving other people access to your work remotely. I'll see you in the next section.